Our reading today is actually, our reading, can you hear me? Okay, is an excerpt from a story that my grandmother wrote in a creative writing class that she took back in 1990. I'm going to go out of order here. Can we show the pictures now and then I'll do the reading? Thank you. So this is my Grammy Gilbert, my great grandmother. Next one. In the foreground is my grandmother, who we called Momo, and her two big brothers, Bert and Earl, are behind her. And then one last one. Here's me with my mom and my aunt and my grandmother. She was 101 in that picture. I got really good genes. Okay, so thank you. Now, my grandmother, Jean Pomeroy, died at the age of 102 in the midst of COVID. Momo, we called her Momo, was loving and organized and disciplined, and she's a big part of who I am today. Her legacy in my family isn't entirely positive. I think every family has at least a little dysfunction here and there and around the edges, but for me, she was primarily a source of strength and resilience. Bucket Brigade is a memoir in which she shares childhood memories, particularly those of her mother, who supported 4 children during the Depression as a single mom after her husband, my great-grandfather, died of sepsis. Better? Better. Okay. So, thanks, Alex. Now, as I was saying, my great-grandmother raised 4 children during the Depression as a single mom after my great-grandfather died of sepsis. And though things logistically must have been incredibly difficult, my great-grandmother never let on to her children, creating a safe and warm and fun home. They were the house in town where all of the teenagers came to hang out and dance around the piano. My great-grandmother used to play, and they'd all sing together. My grandmother got in trouble when she didn't roll back the rugs. So this reading that I'm going to share begins just as my grandmother, now a grown woman, boards the train to join her husband in Baltimore, far away from her mother and siblings. Mom said, "I'll come to the station with you." She did, and as the train pulled away, I waved from the window. She stood there, focused on me, a lifetime of caring etching her face. How much she gave me. She gave me the independence to make my own decisions, an awareness of others and their feelings, and the knowledge my actions affected others I cared for. How many times I have wanted to give up, angry and frustrated, to shut the door with a huge slam and walk away from what I saw as a mess. Remembering Mom, I held steady. Mom was in my background. My caring for her and not wanting to hurt her in any way, my wanting to please her, helped me when I wavered. Generations past and generations to come make me think of one long bucket brigade, hands to hands, person to person, down the long line. Once in a while, the bucket slops over some when strength is low, and the fire still burns. But the next one in line steadies the tired one, and the buckets keep passing until the fire is under control and you can return home to rest. Rest you need so you can subdue the next conflagration. And when it comes, you tackle it Mom's way, steady and sure, with minimum fuss and with firm direction. I couldn't have had a better example. So sometimes it helps when I step back and put things into historical perspective. My great-grandmother, she was almost 30 by the time women were given the right to vote. We are only 60 or so years out from the civil rights movement. There are likely people in this room who remember segregation. Yep. And the movement for gay rights is even younger than that. The truth is, we have come a long way in a comparatively short period of time. I still remember when Lisa Salisbury brought Gloria Steinem here for the Women's Center's 50th anniversary. Gloria told us that social movements take between 100 and 150 years to come to fruition. So as much as it seems obvious to us that diversity is healthy and that all people deserve to have their basic rights respected and supported, we need to remember that these fights are all still in progress. There's no time to rest on our laurels. So it's okay to feel sorry for ourselves sometimes, but we need to remember too that our ancestors actually had it a lot harder than we did. They persevered and they learned and they passed their lessons on to those who came after. They passed those lessons on to us. Now, our families aren't the only legacies we carry, not by a long shot. As Unitarian Universalists, we're inheritors of spiritual legacies from both branches of our family tree. From our Unitarian forebears, we received ideals like religious tolerance, a reverence for nature, and a commitment to using reason and logic to find a path forward. From the Universalists, we carry forward a commitment to social justice and an ethic that centers love and resists fear. These are just a few of the many gifts passed down to us from these spiritual ancestors. Then there are the bright lights, the movement leaders, and the movements themselves. We can choose to understand ourselves as being responsible to help carry forward the legacies of Martin Luther King Jr., Susan B. Anthony, who happens to be a spiritual ancestor as well, and those drag queens who threw bricks at Stonewall. Are you passionate about peace? Who were the people who did pioneering work around peacemaking or nonviolence? Perhaps we see ourselves as descendants of Edward Abbey or Rachel Carson or Annie Dillard. Or fill in the blanks. Who were the people who inspired you and whose work you choose to carry forward? See, we hear a lot about generational trauma, and it's true. Sometimes terrible things break people who then do terrible things in turn. But sometimes those terrible things, they help people learn and grow. Sometimes they make wonderful things happen in the aftermath. And those learnings, that resilience, that gets passed down from person to person, generation to generation as well. This is why it's so important that we listen to people who hold historically marginalized identities. They have a ton of wisdom about how to survive and thrive, or at least how to keep going under oppressive circumstances. They also expose us to truths that privilege might shield us from otherwise, so that we can respond to those truths and move in the world as it is, not as we wish it were. We each have a responsibility to discern the way of being human that is right for us as individuals. We get to choose how to be human. And as we do that work, we naturally and inevitably take bits and pieces of inspiration from those who've gone before. And I'm not saying that we don't learn or experiment or have original thoughts, Lord, no, but I am saying that all of us owe an incredible debt to our ancestors. I'm also saying that reflecting on that debt, on the gifts of wisdom we inherited, leaning into that generational resilience can help us stay grounded and hopeful as we face the challenges of our time. So, for this next part, you will need a piece of paper and a writing implement. You should have gotten one when you came in. If you don't have one, raise your hand and Elizabeth will bring one to you. So I invite you to go ahead and get comfortable. You might close your eyes. You might let your breath slow, deepen. If there are places in your body that are holding tension, you might breathe into them. See if they can let go or relax. Now, I invite you to imagine what James Luther Adams named the cloud of witnesses, a collective group of historical figures, ancestors, and individuals who have embodied your values, who helped you become the person you are today. And again, this is your actual ancestors, your spiritual ancestors, your intellectual ancestors, anyone who inspired you and helped form you. Let their faces or their words come into focus, one after another. And then reach back and imagine the people who inspired and formed them, whose names and words you don't even know, the ones behind our ancestors, and then behind those, and behind those, reaching back into unknown history. Can you feel it? The unstoppable force of progress, the way love and justice have shaped human history. Can you know yourself part of that process of moral evolution? Can you lean into the powerful current of this river that has carried us thus far? Now an invitation to focus in and choose just one drop in that flood of goodness. Maybe it's a person or a phrase or a concept, something that you know in your bones is important and true, something that you feel called to carry forward in the world, a drop that helped fill your bucket. Those of you who are here in person, when you're ready, I'd invite you to write the name and whatever came up for you on your piece of paper. Those of you who are joining us online, I'd invite you to type it into the chat. And we're going to collect these drops in an actual bucket so that we can share some of them at the end of the service.
So I am grateful for the opportunity that I have to share about one of the gifts of resilience in my bucket that I was recently reminded of. A few weeks ago, during the burning service, we sat here in the sanctuary in expectant silence, practicing openness to whatever message, spirit, or our minds or our bodies had to tell us. And as I sat in meditation, my mind thought about today's worship service, and I had an image come to me. I saw my ancestors and those who have gone before me in two lines down each aisle. I imagined some of your ancestors and guides present too. And I sensed their collective wisdom, their strengths and their gifts. I saw them reminding us of those gifts through whispers, music, light, or gentle touch. It's easy for me to picture several of my ancestors because growing up, I saw their faces every single day. So here's a picture. This is on the main wall in my family living room. My parents created a photographic family tree with our family photo in the center and portraits of my ancestors branching out back to my great-great-grandparents. And each time we moved to a new home, the family tree wall moved with us. I have loved looking at their different styles of clothing and hair, imagining what life must have been like for them. The best mustache award definitely goes to my Italian great-great-grandfather, Francesco Moser. Learning about our ancestors and feeling connected to them was very important to my parents and grandparents. So I grew up hearing stories about most of the people on that wall. We also have some of their journals and letters, giving us the opportunity to hear from them and not just about them. One of the gifts of resilience in my bucket comes from my Danish great-great-grandmother, Jenny Marie Andreasen Breinholt. Here's some photos of her as a young woman and later in her life. I love this one of her proudly showing off her fancy coat. Jenny Marie gives me the gift of courage to follow your deeply held beliefs, to act on your convictions, even when it requires doing hard things and venturing out into the unknown. Jenny Marie joined the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in Denmark, and 110 years ago, she emigrated from Denmark to join the Mormon community in Utah. She wrote a brief account of that night when she left Denmark, sharing a tender memory of saying goodbye to her family. Every time I read that simple page from a typewriter and try to imagine what she was feeling that night, I sense a combination of loss and anticipation, of fear and faith. I feel it in my bones. Here are her words. She titled it, "When I Last Saw My Mother's Face," January 7th, 1915, Aarhus, Denmark. I sailed from Aarhus, Denmark at 11 o'clock at night, my first goodbye to home and Denmark. It was a dark and stormy night. I had just said goodbye to my mother and father, 3 sisters, uncle and aunt and friends. I stood on the deck together with some friends and missionaries who were also leaving for USA. As the steamer was leaving very, very slowly, one of the missionaries took his flashlight and made circles around my head so that my folks could see my face for a long time. Then my sister Magda also had a flashlight on the shore, and she took it and circled it around my mother's face. I could see my mother's face for a long time in the darkness of the night until the steamer turned out of the harbor into the ocean. I never have forgotten this. Jenny Marie gives me her courage. She gives me her faith. Over the past 6 years, I've had multiple experiences where I have left the shore of what was familiar and certain, following my heart and my beliefs into what feels at times like a vast, dark unknown, much like the ocean at night. But in the darkness, I see a light circling around the face of Jenny Marie, and across the distance of generations, she tells me, "You can do this. Keep going. You are not alone." So if you need some of that courage or reassurance right now in your life, allow me to share some of my intergenerational gifts with you. Please feel free to take some home with you in your bucket.